Cedric Anthony King thought he was just doing a good deed, but giving a stranger his house key would set off a chain of events he never saw coming. When he returns months later, the simple act of kindness has spiraled into a life-altering revelation. Cedric Anthony King was in a rush, his mind racing as he navigated through the bustling airport terminal. A crucial business trip awaited, and every minute counted. His steps quickened as he passed the crowded check-in desks, but then something caught his attention. A woman sitting alone on a bench looked out of place amid the chaos of the airport. She was beautiful, though the life in her eyes seemed distant, like they had seen too much to remain innocent. Her clothes, worn and faded, told a story of hardship, but there was a quiet dignity in her presence. Cedric hesitated for a moment, his gaze lingering on her. It wasn't just her beauty that drew him in, it was the look in her eyes, a mixture of exhaustion and hope. He knew what it was like to be driven by necessity, to have no choice but to keep pushing forward, no matter the circumstances. And as he stood there, momentarily transfixed, he couldn't help but feel a deep, inexplicable urge to do something. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice breaking the silence that seemed to hang between them. Her eyes flickered toward him, and for a brief moment they softened, as if surprised by his attention. "I'm fine," she replied, her voice steady but tinged with something he couldn't place. "Just waiting." Her answer, simple as it was, felt like a shield, one that she had mastered over time to protect herself from the world. Cedric, however, wasn't convinced. He had lived his life with the privilege of not needing to ask for help. But something in her vulnerability called to him. His mind made the decision before his body could stop him. Without thinking, he pulled his keys from his pocket. "I have a place nearby," he said, his voice firm but kind. "I'll be gone for a few months on business. You can stay at my place. Just take care of it while I'm away." She stared at him for a moment, as if weighing the offer. Cedric could see the hesitation in her eyes, no doubt wondering why a stranger would offer something like that. It wasn't every day that someone simply gave away the keys to their home. "I'm not asking for anything in return," Cedric continued, his words calm but insistent. "You don't have to explain yourself. Just don't stay here." Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she nodded. "Thank you," she whispered, almost as though the words were foreign to her. Cedric handed her the keys, the weight of the gesture lingering in his hand before he let them go. There was something about this woman, something he couldn't place. Maybe it was the way she looked at him as if she had nothing to lose. Or maybe it was the quiet understanding that passed between them, a shared acknowledgement of the world's harshness. He left her there, standing at the threshold of a life he didn't understand, but somehow knew he had to help her escape. As he walked away, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just a simple act of kindness. This moment was the beginning of something far more complicated. As Cedric's life takes an unexpected turn, what do you think lies ahead for him and Sienna? If you're hooked on this story, don't forget to like this video, share your thoughts and predictions in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. And if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe for more twists and turns in this drama-packed series. Now let's dive back into Cedric's story and see how things unfold. The next few months passed in a blur for Cedric. His business trip took him across the country, attending meetings that demanded his attention, pushing him further into the high-stakes world he had mastered. But despite the busy schedule, his mind often wandered back to Sienna. He found himself thinking about the woman he had left behind at the airport, wondering what had become of her. Was she safe? Had she truly found a way to change her life, as he had hoped? He tried to shake the thought, convincing himself that helping her had been the right thing to do. But as each week went by, he couldn't help but feel a nagging sense of curiosity, a desire to know more about her and how she was doing. It had been 3 months since he handed her the keys. By now, he had assumed she would have found her way, maybe gotten a job, maybe started to rebuild her life. He had done his part, after all. It wasn't his responsibility to continue worrying. Still, when he finally finished his work in New York and made his way back to the house by the lake, a part of him felt uneasy. The air around the place felt different, almost foreign. The once calm and pristine house had been neglected during his absence, but not in the way he expected. It wasn't dirty or abandoned. It was lived in. Cedric paused in front of the front door, his hand resting on the knob. There was something unsettling about this moment. He had imagined returning to find the house just as he had left it, quiet and untouched. Instead, he felt a tension in the air, as though something had shifted. He had been the one to offer help, but what had that truly meant for Sienna? What kind of life had she made for herself in his absence? The door creaked open, and the moment Cedric stepped inside, he was hit with a wave of unexpected warmth. The house had transformed. He could hear soft music playing from the living room, the scent of something baking wafting through the air. He followed the trail of comfort and found Sienna standing in the kitchen, her back turned to him as she stirred a pot on the stove. She looked different, more composed somehow. The disheveled woman he had met at the airport had disappeared, replaced by someone who seemed more settled. She was no longer a stranger, but a woman who had claimed space in his world, in his home. The thought startled him. Was this a good thing, or had he unwittingly allowed her to make herself too comfortable? Sienna turned around when she heard the door close behind him. Her eyes widened, and for a split second, there was a flicker of surprise before her expression softened. "You're back," she said, her voice calm but warm. "I'm back," Cedric replied, standing just inside the doorway, unsure of what to say next. His gaze scanned the room, taking in the small changes, the fresh flowers in a vase on the table, the carefully placed pillows on the couch, the soft lighting. It wasn't just a house anymore. It felt like a home, hers as much as it was his. "I thought you'd be back in a few months, but I wasn't sure." Sienna's voice trailed off, as if she were second-guessing herself. "It's been longer than I expected," Cedric admitted, his voice a little strained. "How have you been?" Sienna smiled in a hesitant yet genuine expression. "Better, much better. I found a job, a small place to work part-time. It's not much, but it's something." Cedric took a step further into the room, his gaze softening as he looked at her. "I'm glad to hear that. It's more than I expected when I left you here." Sienna's smile faded slightly. "I didn't want to take advantage, but it was the only option I had." She paused, almost as if waiting for him to judge her. "I didn't expect it to be like this. I didn't expect to feel like I belong." Cedric felt a pang of guilt. He had expected her to simply use the house as a temporary refuge. But what if she had found something more? A sense of home, of belonging. What did that mean for him, for the help he had given her? Was she now entangled in his life in a way he hadn't planned? Sienna's voice broke his thoughts. "I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable. She hesitated. "I thought about leaving a few times, but I didn't want to disappoint you. I know I'm just a stranger to you." Cedric stepped forward, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that surprised him. "You're not a stranger anymore, Sienna. Not to me." There was a pause, heavy with unsaid words. "I want to make this work," he continued, his tone firm. "I want to make sure you're okay, that you're safe. You don't have to leave. You're welcome here for as long as you need." Sienna looked up at him, her expression softening. "Thank you, Cedric. I don't know how to repay you for everything you've done." "You don't have to," Cedric said quietly, his voice almost a whisper. "Just live. That's enough." The days that followed Cedric's return were a strange mix of peace and discomfort. Sienna had settled into the house, making it her own in ways that Cedric hadn't expected. She'd planted flowers in the garden, rearranged the furniture to make the living room cozier, and even started baking in the kitchen. The house, once cold and empty, had begun to feel like a home again. But despite the growing warmth between them, Cedric couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Sienna had changed, but not in the way he thought she would. She was no longer the frightened, lost woman he had met at the airport, but she wasn't fully the woman he wanted her to be either. There was a distance between them now, a quiet tension that hung in the air whenever they were in the same room. One evening, Cedric returned home earlier than expected. The house was unusually quiet. He stepped inside, his footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. Sienna wasn't in the living room or the kitchen, so he made his way to the back of the house toward the large window that overlooked the lake. There she was, standing by the window, looking out at the water. Her posture was stiff, her gaze fixed on the horizon. Sienna didn't turn when he entered the room. She didn't even acknowledge his presence. And for a brief moment, Cedric felt the weight of the unspoken tension between them. He knew she was trying to avoid him, but why? What had happened to the quiet connection they had shared when he first offered her the house? "Sienna," Cedric said softly, his voice breaking the silence. "Are you okay?" She turned then, her expression unreadable. "I'm fine," she replied, but the hesitation in her voice told a different story. He walked closer, his gaze never leaving her. "You've been distant lately," he said, his words more of an observation than a question. "What's going on?" Sienna took a step back, her eyes briefly flickering with something Cedric couldn't quite identify. Guilt, fear, regret. I don't know what you want me to say, she said quietly. I didn't ask for this. I didn't ask for any of it. The words stung more than Cedric had anticipated. He had thought that offering her his house would be enough, that it would solve the problem she was facing. But now, standing in front of him, she seemed more uncertain than ever. It wasn't just about the house, it was about her own place in the world, in his world. I don't want you to say anything, Cedric replied, his voice firm but gentle. I just want you to be honest with me. Sienna's eyes flickered with something deeper, shame perhaps, or was it something more? She glanced away, her hand moving nervously to the window pane. I didn't expect to be here, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I didn't expect to be part of your life. I don't belong here, Cedric. I'm just someone you pitied. Cedric's heart tightened at her words, but he didn't let his emotions show. You're not someone I pity, he said, his voice steady. I wanted to help you because I saw something in you, something worth saving. Sienna shook her head, her lips trembling. You don't understand, she murmured, more to herself than to him. I don't belong here. I'm just a stranger. Before Cedric could respond, there was a knock at the door. He turned, surprised by the intrusion. Sienna quickly stepped away from the window, her expression shifting to one of discomfort. Cedric frowned. Who could that be? When he opened the door, his mother, Charlotte Grace King, stood in the doorway. Her presence was as imposing as ever, and Cedric instantly knew what this visit was about. There was no greeting, no small talk, just the weight of her disapproval. Cedric, Charlotte said coolly, we need to talk. Cedric's jaw tightened. He knew exactly what this was. Not now, Mom, he said, his voice terse. Charlotte ignored him, her gaze sweeping past him into the house. I see you've made some changes, she remarked, her tone cold. I didn't expect to find you here, Sienna. Sienna stiffened, her back straightening as she looked at Charlotte. Cedric could feel the tension rising in the room. He had hoped for a peaceful evening, but now it seemed like his mother was determined to make this situation even more complicated. I don't think this is the right place for you, Sienna, Charlotte continued, her voice sharp. Cedric has a future to think about, and you— Mom, Cedric interrupted, his voice cutting through the air. Not now, not like this. Charlotte's eyes flashed with irritation. I'm just trying to look out for you, Cedric, she said, her tone softening slightly. But this isn't the life you should be living. Sienna's face paled, and Cedric felt a pang of guilt for not protecting her better. This wasn't how he had imagined their reunion. His mother's harsh words were only adding to the weight that had been pressing down on him since he returned. He had wanted to make things right, but now it felt like everything was unraveling. I don't need you to protect me from her, Mom, Cedric said, his voice steady but with a hint of frustration. Sienna's not the problem here. Charlotte turned to him, her eyes narrowing. You don't see it, do you? I see everything I need to see, Cedric replied firmly, and I won't let you destroy what we've started here. The silence between them grew heavy. Cedric stood his ground, the words he had been holding back for so long finally surfacing. He wasn't going to let his mother dictate his life. Not anymore. Not when it came to Sienna. Cedric stood in the doorway, his heart pounding in his chest as he faced his mother. Charlotte's disapproving gaze didn't waver as she took in the scene before her. Her posture was rigid, her arms crossed, but Cedric was determined not to let her break him down this time. Sienna, standing in the corner of the living room, avoided eye contact, her expression a mixture of discomfort and uncertainty. Cedric could feel the shift in the room, the unspoken tension that had settled like a weight between them. He had promised Sienna that she was safe here, that nothing would change. But with his mother's arrival, everything felt fragile again. Charlotte didn't speak right away, and for a moment, Cedric allowed himself to breathe. The silence stretched, thick and oppressive, until his mother finally broke it. You don't get it, do you, Cedric? Charlotte's voice was quiet but laced with sharpness. I'm just trying to protect you. You're playing with fire. Cedric's jaw tightened. I'm not playing with anything, Mom. I'm making my own decisions. This is my life. Your life is not about helping a stranger, Cedric. It's about building something that lasts. You've worked too hard to throw everything away on someone who doesn't belong in your world. Cedric's heart clenched. It was the same old argument. His mother's constant belief that his worth was measured by his success and reputation. She saw nothing beyond appearances, beyond status. She couldn't see Sienna for who she truly was, and Cedric was tired of defending her to his mother. "I didn't bring her into my life out of pity," Cedric replied, his voice steady despite the anger simmering beneath the surface. "She's not some charity case. She's a person, Mom. She's been through things you can't even imagine, and you don't get to judge her." Charlotte's face hardened, her eyes narrowing with disdain. "I'm not judging her, Cedric. I'm judging you. You've always been so focused on your career, your future, and now you're letting some woman, some stranger, take that all away. You're making a mistake." The sting of her words was like a slap in the face, but Cedric didn't flinch. "I'm not making a mistake," he said, his voice firm, "and I'm not going to let you tell me what to do anymore." Sienna shifted uncomfortably, her eyes flicking between Cedric and Charlotte. She had been silent throughout the exchange, but the tension in the room was suffocating. Cedric could tell that she felt the weight of his mother's disapproval, just as he had when he first brought her into his life. The last thing he wanted was for Sienna to feel like she didn't belong here. Cedric's gaze softened as he turned to Sienna, his voice dropping to a gentler tone. "You don't have to stay if you don't want to," he said. "I'll figure this out." Sienna shook her head, her lips trembling slightly. "I'm not going anywhere," she whispered. "I didn't ask for this, but I'm not going to run away either. I don't want to cause more problems." Cedric reached out, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You're not causing problems," he said quietly. "I promise." The room fell silent again as Charlotte watched them. Her expression was unreadable, but Cedric could see the shift in her demeanor. She was fighting something inside, something that wasn't as easily put into words as her disapproval of Sienna. It wasn't just about Sienna, it was about Cedric's decisions, about the choices he was making in his life. And Charlotte, for all her control and certainty, was afraid of losing her grip on him. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Charlotte sighed, her arms uncrossing as she took a step back. "I don't understand this," she admitted, her voice strained, "but I can see you're not going to change your mind." Cedric's eyes narrowed, his pulse quickening. "No, I'm not. Not when it comes to Sienna." Charlotte hesitated, then met Cedric's gaze. "I don't like it, Cedric, but you're an adult. You'll do what you want to do. Just don't let this destroy you." For the first time, Cedric saw the vulnerability in his mother's eyes. It wasn't the anger or control he had grown accustomed to. It was fear. Fear that the son she had raised, the man she had always been so proud of, might be slipping away from her grasp. "Don't worry, Mom," Cedric said quietly. "I'm not going anywhere. I just need you to understand that this is my choice." Charlotte didn't respond right away. She simply nodded, her shoulders slumping as though the weight of the conversation had taken its toll. "I don't have to like it," she said, her voice soft, "but I can't keep trying to control you." As she turned to leave, Cedric felt a small victory. His mother had backed down, but there was still work to be done. The battle wasn't over yet, but he had taken the first step toward asserting his own independence. And for once, he felt a sense of clarity. Sienna, still standing by the window, looked at him with a mix of gratitude and uncertainty. Cedric walked over to her, offering her a reassuring smile. "You're not alone in this, Sienna," he said softly. "Not anymore." And for the first time in what felt like forever, Sienna allowed herself to believe him. The days after the confrontation with his mother were heavy, but Cedric's resolve only strengthened. He had made his decision, and for the first time in a long while, he felt like he was in control of his life. Sienna remained quiet, her presence lingering in the house like a shadow that Cedric couldn't shake off. She was trying to process everything just as he was. But there was a distance between them now, one that neither of them had asked for. Cedric couldn't help but wonder if he had made a mistake. He had given Sienna a home out of compassion, but now that he had returned, the weight of his actions was starting to feel heavier than he expected. He could see the uncertainty in her eyes, the way she hesitated whenever he spoke to her. She was afraid of getting too close, afraid of the fallout that might come from being so deeply embedded in his life. But it wasn't just her fear that kept her distant. It was his own. He knew what his mother thought. She had made that very clear. And while Cedric had stood up to her, part of him still wondered if he had made the right choice. It was one thing to offer help, but it was another to fully accept the responsibility of another person's life. The house had changed with Sienna in it, but Cedric hadn't fully understood what that meant. Sienna had her own battles to fight, and Cedric couldn't fight them for her. But he didn't want her to leave. He didn't want to lose the connection they had started to build. Every time he saw her standing in the kitchen or sitting by the window, there was a pang of guilt in his chest. Was he truly helping her? Or was he just trying to fix a part of himself that felt broken? That evening, as the sun began to set over the lake, Cedric found Sienna sitting on the porch. She was staring at the water, her face illuminated by the soft golden light of the fading day. She looked peaceful, but there was something in the way she sat, so still that made Cedric uneasy. He couldn't help but wonder if she was planning to leave. He had sensed the growing distance between them, but he hadn't expected it to come so quickly. Sitting down beside her, Cedric didn't say anything at first. He just let the silence stretch between them, the soft lapping of the water against the shore filling the space. Finally, Sienna turned her head, her eyes meeting his. "I think I should go," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. The words hit Cedric like a punch to the gut. He had known this moment was coming, but hearing her say it aloud made it feel real. She wasn't just a guest in his home anymore. She had become someone he cared about. And now she was telling him that it was over, that she couldn't stay. "Why?" Cedric asked, his voice thick with emotion. "Is it because of my mother?" Sienna shook her head, but there was a sadness in her eyes. "It's not just that. I don't want to be a burden on you, Cedric. You've been kind to me, but I can't keep living in your world. I don't belong here." Cedric's heart ached. He understood her fear, but it didn't make it any easier to hear. She had come to this house as a stranger, and now, after all they had been through, she was telling him she had to leave. He couldn't let that happen. "You do belong here," Cedric said, his voice firm. "You're not a burden. I told you, you're not going anywhere." Sienna looked at him, uncertainty flickering in her eyes. "But I don't want to stay because I feel like I owe you something," she said. "I want to make my own life, but I don't know if I'm ready for that yet." Cedric reached out, placing a hand on hers. "You don't have to make any decisions right now," he said softly. "Just stay. Let me help you, but don't feel like you have to leave because of what anyone else thinks. Not even me." Sienna's eyes filled with unshed tears, but she didn't pull away. She didn't speak, but the silence between them was filled with understanding. Cedric didn't have all the answers. He didn't know what the future held, but in that moment he knew that he couldn't let Sienna go, not when she needed him, and not when he needed her. "I'm not going anywhere," she whispered, finally allowing herself to lean into him, just slightly. The warmth of her touch was enough to reassure him. They didn't have to have it all figured out. They could take it one day at a time. And for the first time since he had returned, Cedric felt like he was no longer just trying to fix the world around him. He was simply living in it with someone who mattered. The days following Sienna's decision to stay were filled with a quiet peace that Cedric hadn't anticipated. The tension between them had lifted, though the unspoken complexities of their situations still loomed over their interactions. Cedric found himself watching her more closely now, noticing the subtle shifts in her behavior, the way she hesitated before answering a question, or the distant look in her eyes when she thought no one was watching. It was clear that she was still carrying the weight of her past, and Cedric wasn't sure how to help her carry it. But as much as he wanted to dive deeper into her world, to understand what had brought her to this point, he knew he had to let her open up in her own time. It wasn't his place to force her to confront the things she wasn't ready to face. One evening, as Cedric returned home from work, he found Sienna sitting on the porch, a thick book resting in her lap. She looked peaceful, the soft glow of the setting sun casting a warm hue on her face. Cedric paused for a moment, taking in the scene. She was a stranger in his life, yet in this moment, she felt like a part of it. "Mind if I join you?" Cedric asked, his voice breaking the comfortable silence. Sienna looked up, offering a small smile. "Of course, it's peaceful out here." Cedric sat beside her, allowing the silence to stretch between them for a few moments before he spoke. "You've been quiet lately, Sita," he said, his voice gentle. "I know you've been through a lot, Sienna, but I want you to know that I'm here for you. You don't have to carry it all alone." Sienna's fingers tightened around the spine of the book in her hands, her eyes flickering with a mix of uncertainty and something else, something darker. She looked out at the lake, her voice barely audible. "You don't know what it's like, Cedric, to live like I did, to have nothing, to be nothing." Cedric's heart sank at the rawness in her words. He wanted to tell her that he understood, that he knew what it was like to feel lost, to feel like you had nothing to offer. But he realized then that he could never truly understand. He had never lived the way Sienna had. He had never felt the kind of desperation she had. I can't imagine what you've been through, Cedric said quietly, his gaze meeting hers. But I want to try. I want to understand. Sienna swallowed hard, her expression hardening as if she were preparing herself for something. I wasn't always like this, she said, her voice trembling slightly. I had a family, a life, but things changed, and I lost it all. It wasn't just about being homeless, it was about being abandoned. By everyone. By the people who were supposed to love me. Her words hit Cedric like a wave, and he felt his chest tighten. The pain in her voice was unmistakable, and for the first time he realized how deeply her past had scarred her. It wasn't just the physical hardship she had endured. It was the emotional toll of being discarded, of losing her sense of self in a world that had turned its back on her. Why didn't you tell me? Cedric asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Sienna shook her head, the hint of tears welling in her eyes. Because I didn't want you to pity me, she said, her voice breaking. I didn't want to be a burden. I thought if I stayed in the shadows long enough, maybe I could find a way out. But I was wrong. I don't know how to fix it. I don't even know where to start. Cedric reached out, gently taking her hand in his. You don't have to fix anything, Sienna. You're not alone in this anymore. The words hung in the air, and for a moment, the weight of everything they had shared seemed to lift. It wasn't a solution, but it was a step, a small, important step toward healing. Sienna wasn't alone, and neither was he. I'm here, Cedric said softly. We're in this together. Sienna looked at him, her eyes filled with gratitude and something deeper, something that had been hidden beneath her guarded exterior. Slowly she nodded, her grip tightening on his hand. For the first time since they had met, there was a sense of hope in her eyes. It wasn't much, but it was enough. The following days were quieter, but the unease between Cedric and Sienna lingered. They had made progress, yet it felt like there was an invisible barrier between them. Cedric could see the changes in her, how she had begun to relax, how she started to trust him, but there were still pieces of her past she kept hidden, like a tightly sealed box she refused to open. And that was okay for now. But Cedric couldn't shake the feeling that something was still missing, something Sienna had yet to share. He understood her hesitation, the way she pulled back whenever things became too real. But he needed to know what had broken her so completely. What had led her to a life of solitude, of surviving on the edge of the world. He tried to be patient, giving her space to come to him when she was ready. But his curiosity gnawed at him, his need to understand her past, pushing him to find the answers that remained elusive. He had promised her that he would be there for her, but how could he do that if he didn't truly know the depth of her wounds? That evening, as the light outside began to fade into twilight, Cedric found Sienna sitting on the porch again, her legs tucked beneath her. She was staring out at the lake, her face turned toward the horizon, lost in thought. The scene before him felt oddly familiar, like something he had witnessed before, but it had never been this personal. Hey, Cedric said quietly, taking a seat beside her. She didn't look at him, but he could feel the weight of her presence. It was like she was holding herself together, afraid that if she let go for even a moment, everything might fall apart. Hi, Sienna replied, her voice soft but distant. He hesitated before speaking again. You've been through a lot, haven't you? Sienna nodded, her fingers nervously fidgeting with the hem of her sleeve. I've seen things, she said, her voice trembling slightly. Things I never thought I would have to see. Things that change you. You can't just forget them. You can't just move on. Cedric leaned forward, his voice gentle. You don't have to forget, Sienna, but you don't have to carry it all alone either. Sienna's eyes flickered toward him, a mixture of pain and fear in her gaze. For a moment, there was silence between them, the kind of silence that spoke volumes. Then, as if something inside her finally broke, she began to speak, slowly, carefully, as though choosing each word with great caution. I wasn't always like this, she started, her voice barely above a whisper. I had a family once, a mother, a father. I had dreams. I was supposed to be someone, Cedric. But life, it doesn't always work out the way you expect. People change, and sometimes they leave you behind. Cedric could see the rawness in her eyes, the vulnerability she had hidden so well for so long. He waited, giving her time to continue. My parents were everything to me, Sienna continued, her voice growing stronger as the words tumbled out. But when I was 18, everything fell apart. My father got sick, really sick. He couldn't work anymore, couldn't do anything. My mother, yes, she didn't know how to cope with it. She was angry all the time, And one day she just left, just like that. She walked out the door and never came back. The pain in her words hit Cedric like a blow to the chest. He had never imagined that this was her story, that the pain she carried wasn't just the result of being homeless, but the abandonment of the very people who were supposed to protect her. I stayed with my dad for a while, Sienna said, her voice wavering. But he was getting worse. I tried to take care of him, but I was just a kid. I didn't know how. And when he died, I didn't know what to do. I didn't have anyone left. I ended up on the streets, alone. Cedric's heart clenched as he listened, the weight of her words sinking in. He reached out, placing a hand gently on hers. I'm so sorry, Sienna, he said quietly, his voice full of compassion. Sienna looked at him, her eyes filled with tears she hadn't allowed herself to cry. I never thought I'd be in this place, she said, her voice breaking. I never thought I'd be that person, alone, with no one to care for me. I didn't know how to ask for help. Cedric squeezed her hand, offering her a soft smile. You don't have to ask for help, Sienna. I'm here. You don't have to go through this alone anymore. Sienna's gaze softened, and for the first time in months, she allowed herself to believe it. She let herself believe that she could have something more than just survival, that she could have a future, a real one. But as she looked up at Cedric, she saw the same uncertainty in his eyes. He was offering her something, but there was still a hesitation, a question neither of them had voiced yet. Could they truly move forward from the past? I don't know what happens next, Sienna whispered, but I'm willing to treat. Cedric nodded, a quiet determination settling in his chest. We'll figure it out, he said, his voice steady. Together. And for the first time in a long time, they both felt the weight of the past begin to lift, just a little. The next few days passed in a haze for Cedric and Sienna. The tension that had once filled the house seemed to dissipate, but a new kind of unease settled between them. Cedric knew that the conversation they had shared was important, but he also felt the weight of the unspoken truth lingering in the air. Sienna had shared more of her past than she ever had before, and for the first time, Cedric felt like he was seeing the real her. The woman who had been scarred, abandoned, and forced to survive. Yet there was still something in her eyes that told him she hadn't shared everything. There were parts of her story still locked away, buried deep beneath the layers of pain and pride. One evening, Cedric arrived home earlier than usual. He expected to find Sienna in her usual spot, sitting by the window, lost in thought. But when he entered the living room, it was empty. The house felt quieter than usual, almost as if it were holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Cedric's eyes scanned the room, looking for any sign of Sienna. And then he heard it, the soft sound of footsteps coming from upstairs. He made his way up to the second floor, his heart pounding in his chest, though he wasn't sure why. When he reached the top of the stairs, he saw Sienna standing in the hallway, holding a small box in her hands. Her expression was distant, her eyes focused on the box, as if it held the answers to a question she couldn't quite ask. Sienna? Cedric's voice was gentle, his concern rising. What's going on? She looked up at him, her face guarded. I found this, she said quietly, her voice almost shaking. It's something I've kept hidden for a long time. Sienna held out the box, and Cedric took it from her hands, feeling the weight of it in his palm. It was small, old, perhaps something from her past. He opened it slowly, careful not to disturb whatever was inside. As the lid came off, Cedric was met with a stack of old photographs. The faces of a younger Sienna, her parents, and a few other people he couldn't recognize, stared back at him from the faded images. The pictures seemed to tell a story he wasn't entirely prepared to hear. Sienna's voice broke the silence. These were taken before everything fell apart, before my mother left, before everything changed. These are the people I used to know, the life I used to have. Cedric flipped through the pictures, his eyes lingering on each one. There were pictures of a young girl with a bright smile, her parents standing proudly beside her. They looked like a family in every sense of the word, a family that had it all. But as he flipped to the next picture, something changed. There was a photograph of Sienna and her father alone, standing outside a rundown apartment complex. Her smile was gone, replaced by a sadness that Cedric hadn't seen before. I don't think I ever told you the whole story, Sienna continued, her voice trembling. After my mom left, my dad tried to keep us going, but he couldn't. He couldn't take care of both of us, and eventually, I was just left there. I tried to get by, but without him, I ended up on the streets. Cedric's heart ached for her, but there was something else too, something he couldn't ignore. This story, this part of her past, was a piece of the puzzle he had been trying to understand. It wasn't just about surviving on the streets. It was about the abandonment, the feeling of being left behind when she needed someone the most. I never knew you had all of this, Cedric said softly, his voice thick with emotion. He looked up from the pictures to meet her gaze. You've been carrying this around all this time. Sienna nodded, her expression a mixture of pain and acceptance. I didn't want to let anyone in. I didn't want to let people see me as weak, as someone who couldn't handle her own life. I thought I could fix it on my own, but I couldn't. Cedric stepped closer to her, his heart breaking as he saw the vulnerability in her eyes. He had never fully understood what it meant to carry the weight of such deep pain. But now, standing in front of him, Sienna was offering him a piece of herself, something she had kept locked away for so long. You're not alone anymore, Cedric said, his voice firm but full of warmth. I don't care about your past, Sienna. I care about you. And whatever comes next, we'll face it together. Sienna swallowed, the tears she had been holding back threatening to spill over. But she didn't pull away. Instead, she let herself believe, if only for a moment, that Cedric meant it. That she didn't have to keep running. That maybe, just maybe, she could let someone in. I don't know if I'm ready for that, she whispered, her voice small but honest. You don't have to be ready, Cedric replied softly. Just let me help, one step at a time. And in that moment, Sienna realized that maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to carry the weight of her past alone anymore. The days that followed were marked by a newfound, tentative calm. Sienna and Cedric had reached a kind of understanding. Though it was fragile, it was enough for the time being. The house, once filled with tension, had become quieter, more comfortable. They spent their days in relative peace, though Cedric couldn't shake the nagging feeling that there was still more to uncover, more that Sienna hadn't shared with him. Sienna had begun to open up more, but only in small, hesitant steps. She helped around the house more, making dinner occasionally or joining Cedric for walks around the lake. But the walls she had built around herself remained intact. Every time Cedric tried to ask more about her life, her past, she would retreat into herself again. He could see the weight she carried, but he couldn't force her to release it. One evening, as Cedric returned home after a long day, he found Sienna sitting in the living room, a stack of old letters spread out before her. She hadn't noticed him enter, her gaze fixed on the paper in front of her. The room was dimly lit, the soft glow of the fireplace casting shadows on the walls. He stood in the doorway for a moment, watching her, wondering what she was thinking. Her fingers trembled slightly as she reached for one of the letters, her eyes scanning the words, though Cedric couldn't see what was written. Sienna! Cedric's voice broke the silence, gentle but curious. Sienna startled slightly, her hand pulling back from the letters as she looked up at him. Her eyes were filled with a mix of surprise and guilt, and for the first time, Cedric saw the rawness in her expression. The walls she had put up, the ones she had been hiding behind, suddenly felt thinner. Hey, Cedric, she said, her voice small. I didn't hear you come in. What are you looking at? Cedric asked, his tone soft but steady. He stepped into the room, his gaze shifting to the letters on the table. Sienna hesitated for a moment, then slowly pushed the letters aside, as if she had been caught doing something she wasn't ready to share. Just old stuff, she said quietly, looking down at her hands. From when I was younger. Cedric didn't push her. Instead, he sat down beside her, his eyes focused on the letters. You don't have to tell me if you're not ready, but I want you to know I'm here when you are. Sienna looked up at him, her expression conflicted. There was a vulnerability in her eyes that hadn't been there before, a mixture of fear and something softer, something like hope. She sighed, her shoulders slumping, as if she had been carrying an invisible weight for far too long. I've been holding on to these letters for so long, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. They're all I have left of my parents, of who I used to be. Cedric nodded, his heart aching for her. He didn't know what it was like to lose everything, to feel like you were drifting through life without any anchor. But in that moment, he could see how much these letters meant to her, how much of her past they carried. Do you want to talk about it? Cedric asked softly, his voice calm, patient. Sienna's eyes flickered with uncertainty, but she didn't look away. Slowly, she reached for one of the letters and unfolded it. Her hands trembled as she held it, and Cedric could see how hard it was for her to relive this part of her past. These are from my mom, she said, her voice tight with emotion. Before she left, before everything fell apart, She wrote these letters to me when I was in foster care, but I never had the courage to read them until now. Cedric didn't say anything. He just sat there watching her, waiting for her to continue. She had kept this part of her life locked away, and Cedric knew that it was something she had to process in her own time. I don't know why I'm reading them now, Sienna murmured, her eyes scanning the letter. Maybe I thought it would help me understand why she left, why she chose to abandon me. A long silence followed as Cedric let her speak, his hand resting gently on hers for support. He didn't know the answers, but he wanted to be there for her in this moment, even if it meant sitting in silence. I don't know if I can forgive her, Sienna continued softly, her voice trembling. But I need to understand. I need to know what happened to the person she was before all of this. Cedric squeezed her hand, his voice steady. You don't have to have all the answers right now, Sienna. Just take it one step at a time. You're not alone in this. Sienna turned to him, her eyes filled with unshed tears. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to believe him, to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could let go of the pain she had been holding onto for so long. The weeks that followed felt like a turning point, a subtle shift in the way Cedric and Sienna interacted. The weight of their pasts had not vanished, but they were learning how to carry it together. The unspoken understanding between them had deepened, and though they hadn't figured everything out, there was a quiet sense of hope that had settled in the house. For the first time, Cedric could see a future, one where Sienna was no longer just a stranger in his life, but someone he cared for deeply. Sienna had been more open, allowing herself to lean on Cedric in ways she hadn't before. She still kept some things to herself, but she no longer retreated when he asked about her past. And Cedric? He found himself more patient, more willing to give her the space she needed while also offering his support when it mattered most. There were still moments of hesitation between them, but they were learning to navigate them together. One evening, Cedric arrived home to find Sienna sitting at the kitchen table, a notebook in front of her. She was scribbling something, her brow furrowed in concentration. As he walked in, she looked up, a small smile crossing her face. Hey, Cedric greeted her softly. What's this? Sienna's smile widened slightly, though it was still tinged with uncertainty. I've been writing, trying to figure some things out. Cedric leaned against the doorframe, watching her. Writing about what? Sienna hesitated before answering, her eyes briefly flickering to the notebook. About everything. About what happened and what comes next. Cedric nodded, understanding. Writing had always been a way for people to process their thoughts, to work through the things they couldn't say out loud. It was clear that Sienna was finally beginning to confront her past, not just in words, but in actions. Can I read it? He asked, his voice gentle. Sienna hesitated, her hand hovering over the notebook before she slowly slid it toward him. I'm not sure it's any good, she said, her voice tinged with a mix of hope and self-doubt. Cedric picked up the notebook, his eyes scanning the pages as he began to read. The words were raw, vulnerable. Sienna had poured her heart onto the pages. She wrote about her childhood, her family, and the pain of losing both. She wrote about the years spent on the streets, trying to survive, trying to find a way out. But there was something different in the way she had written it. The words weren't just about survival anymore. They were about healing. As he finished reading, Cedric looked up at her, his heart swelling with admiration. This is incredible, Sienna, he said softly. You've come so far. Sienna looked down at her hands, a faint blush creeping up her neck. I'm just trying to figure it all out, she whispered. But I don't know what's next. I don't know what my future holds. Cedric set the notebook down and walked over to her, gently taking her hands in his. You don't have to know everything right now. You just need to keep moving forward, one step at a time. And I'll be here, every step of the way. Sienna looked up at him, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. For the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to believe in something beyond the pain she had carried for so long. There was a future ahead of her, and for the first time, it didn't seem so impossible. I'm scared, Sienna admitted, her voice trembling. Cedric smiled gently, squeezing her hands. I'm scared too. But we don't have to be scared alone. For the first time in what felt like forever, Sienna let herself relax into the warmth of Cedric's embrace. She wasn't alone anymore. And for the first time, she felt like she might finally have a chance at a new beginning. The journey that Cedric and Sienna embarked on wasn't easy, but it was a journey of growth, healing, and learning how to love and trust again. Through their struggles, they both discovered that sometimes the most difficult parts of life can lead to the most beautiful new beginnings. It's not about erasing the past, but about finding the strength to move forward, one step at a time. The lesson here? Healing is a process, and no one has to go through it alone. The value of compassion, understanding, and second chances can transform lives. Whether it's a stranger you help or someone close to you, remember that kindness can change everything. What do you think about Cedric and Sienna's journey? Do you think they'll be able to fully heal and find happiness together? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you've enjoyed this story, please give a like to show your support. Thank you for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.